Hello there, my name is Laurier and welcome to my channel Old Dirty History, where I like to talk about whatever historic topic, person, place, thing, or event that I want to talk about. And today I want to talk about history's biggest beefs of all time. At least it's one of the biggest beefs to me in history. And that beef was between inventor Nikola Tesla and businessman Thomas Edison. And note the businessman part of that statement, which I'm going to get into in this video. And before I dive in, I just want to take this time to really thank all of the people who recently subscribed to the Old Dirty History channel. I never would have thought in a million years even one person would want to listen to me talk for 30 minutes or more straight. So thank you. I'm really glad that people are actually enjoying my content. And for anyone out there who actually cares, just a quick life update. I just finished my master's degree program. I have a master's degree. It's crazy. I'm just so proud of myself, I have to say. I'm just so happy. And it's why it took me a while to actually upload this video, because I was finishing my finals, I was wrapping up my program and all my requirements. And so that took literally everything out of me. And so I had to kind of put my channel on hold. So for good reason, this video comes a little late. All right, so moving right along, let's talk about this beef between Tesla and Edison. Thomas Edison was born on February 11th in 1847 in Milan, Ohio. When he was really young, him and his family moved to Port Huron, Michigan. Edison was the youngest of 7 children, and during his formal education years, Edison learned that he was dyslexic, but he was determined to not let his dyslexia put a limit on his ability to learn. And Edison's mother was completely supportive of him. And after a short while, he actually left school to be homeschooled by his mother, and this was after hearing his teacher refer to him as being intellectually disabled in some way. And rightfully so, this really pissed Edison's mother off, and she was like, I'm gonna show you people, okay? Talk about my son, he's going to be a genius. At a very early age, Edison displayed signs of being a very savvy businessman. After he and his family moved to Port Huron, he started selling candy and vegetables on trains, and then he eventually moved on to selling newspapers. He even installed a printing press in one of the train cars to produce his own newspaper, and he called it the Grand Trunk Herald. And he actually named this newspaper after the railroad that the train rode on, which was the Grand Trunk Railroad. And I'm gonna be completely transparent, like right now, here and now. I am very biased when it comes to Edison and Tesla. I am a Tesla fan 100%. I don't like him, okay? I just don't. And if you got a problem with that, okay, you wanna fight? No, but seriously, I don't like him. I acknowledge what he's done, but I still don't like him. And so even with that being said, I acknowledge the fact that a young child becoming a savvy businessman at such a young age is pretty impressive. You know, when I was like, because I believe at this point he was around like 9 or 10. And I'm thinking about what I was doing at 9 or 10. My main goal was going outside to go play and coming back in time for dinner and watching Dragon Ball Z. That was pretty much my highlight at 9. So thinking about the fact that this young boy was developing his own newspaper, was selling vegetables and cakes, like, that's really impressive. However, at the same time, he also installed a laboratory in the train's baggage car, and he caused the entire train car to catch on fire, which is just wild. There's some kid in the back of this car playing with chemicals and it catches on fire. Like, where were the adults in this equation? In 1863, Edison started a job as a telegraph operator. And if you're not familiar with what a telegraph is, it was the way people used to send and receive electronic messages across a long distance before emails and text messages existed. So what would happen is you would give a telegrapher a message and they would send it by pointing at letters in the alphabet using needles. This would send signals through electrical cables to the nearest telegraph office. Eventually, they started using Morse code because it was a lot faster, or they would send a telegram, and a telegram used regular text instead of Morse code. Anyway, Edison was rewarded this job after saving a 3-year-old child from being ran over by a runaway train. The station agent was the father of the child, and so he offered this to Edison as a reward for saving his son's life. You know, I have to acknowledge what a wild time this must have been to live in, you know, the 19th century. At this point, Edison is 16 years old when he saves this 3-year-old child from being hit by a runaway train, right? The shit is crazy. Burning trains, children just chilling on tracks with runaway trains just all over the place. This just sounds nuts to me. So while Edison was a telegraph operator, he was always trying to find ways to really improve this machine. And in 1866, at 19 years old, Edison moved to Louisville, Kentucky, where he got a new job working with Western Union as a night shift telegraph operator. And at this time, Western Union was a giant in the telegraph industry. They didn't just, wire money and do money orders. Originally, this was their thing. This was their business. And during these late nights where he would just think of all these endless possibilities, he developed a way telegraph operators could send 2 messages at once, and this saved operators a lot of time when sending these messages, which I admit, this is very impressive. Again, at this point, Edison is still a teenager. He's 19, and he is already just killing it. Fast forward to the 1870s, Edison has been working diligently on improving the telegraph still. And during that time, in 1877, he created a life-changing invention at the time, and it was called the phonograph. And if you're unfamiliar with what a phonograph is, they were these machines that could record sound on these cylinders that could be played back. And how this works is the sound is etched into the surface of the cylinder, and then a stylus responds to the vibrations from the grooves in the cylinder. These cylinders were originally made out of wax, but later ones were made from plastic. And if the phonograph sounds familiar to you, that's because it was a precursor to what would become a record player in vinyl. And fun fact, just random fun fact, the first thing that Edison decided to record on a wax cylinder with a phonograph was the childhood song, Mary Had a Little Lamb. Knowing that that was the first thing that came to mind, I don't know, it just creeps me out. He's weird. It was after inventing the phonograph that Edison became known as the Wizard of Menlo Park. And Menlo Park was this community located in Middlesex, New Jersey. And this is where Edison created the world's first industrial research lab of its kind. However, even though he was improving telegraphs and he created the phonograph and he was creating other things, his true love was electricity. Edison wanted to find a way to make electricity accessible to everyone. And as a businessman, this is smart. More people, more money. And in order for this to even happen, electricity would have to be so cheap that it would entirely replace candles, because at this point in history, people use candles and lanterns for light, and this stuff is not cheap. And Edison wanted to make electricity so affordable that the only people who would use candles would be the rich. In an attempt to accomplish this, Edison founded the Edison Electric Light Company with the financial backing of this regular smegular guy. You might know him. I don't know. You might know him as J.P. Morgan. With J.P. Morgan's money, Edison was able to design the first power stations in the US for domestic light. And in order to give power to over 10,000 lamps in the city, this station required that there be poles with hanging lines all over the place. This was how the electricity traveled. And these lines were like really low hanging wires. And now remember, all this stuff is new. A lot of people don't know exactly what electricity is. And so you have these very dangerous, very low hanging wires carrying electricity just chilling out there. And mixing that with people not being educated on exactly what electricity is and how dangerous it can be, you can only imagine that's a recipe for disaster, right? And those people who were not aware of what it was included children. And so children who didn't know what these low hanging wires were saw them as a good time. You know what I mean? And they would hang on them and climb up these poles and hang from these dangerous wires. And Edison, He knew this. He knew that these kids were hanging on these wires, and he knew how dangerous it was. Did he do anything about it? No. Even though he knew that these wires could injure these children and potentially kill them, he was focused on the bag. He wanted to get the money. On Christmas Day in 1871, 24-year-old Edison married his first wife, and her name was Mary Stilwell. Mary worked at Edison's telegraph company with Edison and his associates. And at that time, she was just 16 years old. And one day when Edison was in the office, he just so happened to notice her for the first time, I guess. When Mary caught Edison's eye, he started to stare at her so much like a creep that it made Mary so uncomfortable that she could not continue her work. Yeah. Edison then asked Mary if she liked him, and Mary responded, well, I mean, you kind of creep me out. You make me very uncomfortable, actually. Really, you scare me. Edison then asked Mary if she would be willing to marry him. I know that this is the 19th century and shit was different. You know, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like it wasn't. We're not gonna do this. We're not gonna pretend. Am I saying it was right? Hell no. Instead of, I don't know, not being a fucking creep, what does Edison do? He told her to go home and think about it. Don't answer right now. Just get back to me. Just sleep on it. They got married a week later. Some of y'all's dead idols were not the best people. I'm sorry. It's true. Now, I don't want to make it seem like Edison was the only creep here, because I would be doing an injustice, okay? We're going to talk about Tesla's weird shit too. Okay, he is not immune to the spotlight. I admit that I am biased. I do prefer Tesla over Edison, but Tesla was also a weirdo too. Later in life, Tesla became obsessed with pigeons, so much so that he would bring them back to his hotel room. And if they were like injured and they needed to be healed, he'd bring them back and he would nurse them back to health, which I think is great. You know, I think that's a very sweet thing. I think it's amazing. And notice that I said his hotel room. Tesla didn't really have a home base. He never really had an actual home where he lived at. He stayed in hotel rooms, and he also never had a family. He never had kids, and he never married. Anyway, so this is when it gets weird. So there was this one pigeon that he grew very fond of, and just like with other pigeons, he brought it back to his hotel room to nurse it back to health after it had gotten injured. When talking about this pigeon, this is what he said. "I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman, and she loved me. As long as I had her, there was a purpose to my life." Oh God, I really hope Tesla did not fuck a pigeon. I really do. So here's another odd thing that I came across about Tesla. There was a lot of intrigue about his sexual orientation when he was alive. People questioned whether he was heterosexual or if he was gay. And please don't stop listening, because I'm not trying to say that he was weird because of his sexual orientation. That's not what I'm getting at. So keep listening. What was odd is that there was this young man named Kenneth Sweezy. And when I say young, I mean he was 19. He was a teenager. And he became friends with Tesla when Tesla was in his late 60s. And Sweezy really idolized Tesla. He really looked up to him. And so there is this power imbalance here. You know what I mean? It's in play, okay? Sweezy talked about how he would come to visit Tesla, and Tesla would answer his door butt ass naked in front of this 19-year-old boy. Yeah, that was a thing. Nikola Tesla was born on July 10th, 1856 in Smiljan, Croatia. But at that time, this area was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Tesla lived on a farm with his father, who was an Orthodox priest, and his mother, who managed the farm. And he was the fourth of 5 children. At a really young age, Tesla started to show signs of obsessive compulsive disorder. He was also a germaphobe, and he had this aversion to touching other people's hair. He was also obsessed with calculating the volume of soup in his bowl whenever he ate soup, and he would count the number of steps he took. And he was also obsessed with numbers that were divisible by 3. So like in his later years when he was living in hotels, he would only stay in hotel rooms where their number was divisible by 3. While in school, Tesla fell in love with electricity after watching his teacher during a demonstration with static electricity. Now, Tesla had a very rough life. Starting at a young age, he experienced a fair amount of grief and challenges. He lost his only brother when he was 5, and he would have nightmares about his brother's death that would plague him for the rest of his life. He also almost died from cholera at a young age too. And then while in school, he had a gambling problem, which eventually caused him to drop out. And then after dropping out of school, he was so ashamed of himself that he suffered a nervous breakdown. In 1881, he decided to move to Budapest, Hungary, and started working at the Budapest Telephone Exchange, where he really excelled. The Budapest Telephone Exchange was a telegraph company, like Western Union. While working at the Budapest Telephone Exchange, Tesla became very depressed, and to try to improve his mental health, he started going on long walks every day. And while going on one of those walks, he had this voila moment. And this was while he was feeding some pigeons. His obsession with pigeons started at an early age, I think. This sudden eureka moment started the initial plans of what would become alternating current, what Tesla would become known for. In that moment, Tesla came up with this idea for a polyphase motor, a device that could supply alternating electrical currents. Unfortunately for Tesla, at this time, he did not have the financial backing he would need to make this thought a reality. So years would go by before he would actually be able to build it. So while he was in that park that day, he created a sketch of his idea in the dirt, and he kept it in his memory bank for a long time. I'm talking about 10 years. And he had faith during that whole time that alternating current, also known as AC, would revolutionize the electricity game, and that it would be far more superior to what was known as direct current. Now, Edison was a supporter of direct current because he used it for the system of electricity he designed. And so I am not an electrical engineer. I'm not a scientist. I am not an expert on anything to do with electricity, but I felt it necessary to do some preliminary research as to what all these things mean, because it's harder to understand the relevancy behind their beef without understanding what alternating current is, also known as AC, and direct current, known as DC. From my understanding, direct current is an electric charge that can only flow in one direction. It's a very simple power source that can be found in laptops, flashlights, and other objects that use batteries. Direct current was first harnessed by a guy named Alessandro Volta in 1800. And if that name sounds familiar, it was actually this guy, Volta, that coined the term volt, which is used to describe units of power. So Edison's direct current was only capable of sending the same amount of electricity to all places and over short distances. And so this required more power plants, which equates to costing more money. Tesla's alternating current, however, was capable of traveling across longer distances, making it less expensive than direct current. In 1882, Tesla moved to Paris and got a job working for the Continental Edison Company, where he installed indoor incandescent lighting. And in this job, Tesla was able to get hands-on engineering and machine building experience. And just like at his last job, Tesla, he really excelled. However, he was still really suffering from a lot of mental health issues. He would sometimes suffer from hallucinations that were so severe at times that he said he could see the air around him filled with tongues of living flame. Not to make light of his mental health issues, but that sounds fucking terrifying. I don't even know what the hell tongues of living flame looks like, and I don't ever want to know what that looks like. That sounds horrific. Although Tesla's employers and supervisors were really impressed with his work, he could not get them to invest in alternating current or even listen to it. He was confident that AC would be life-changing, but they didn't believe him. In fact, they mocked him. They thought he was crazy. In 1884, one of Edison's managers, who was a guy named Charles Batchelor, asked Tesla to move to the US. The first time Tesla approached Edison about AC, it was at Coney Island while Edison was with his wife. But Tesla described Edison as being too distracted to actually listen to his pitch. So Tesla decided to wait a while longer to try again. When Edison finally listened to Tesla's pitch, Edison told Tesla that AC was way too dangerous and it had absolutely no future, which in retrospect, that is hilarious considering we literally I am using AC right now. And of course he wasn't happy with Edison's response. I can only imagine that must have been a very disappointing experience for him. Tesla's final straw came just 6 months into joining the US division when someone or a group of individuals at the company decided to play a practical joke on him. And so couple that situation with his experience with Edison responding to AC the way he did, he was like, deuces, I'm done, I'm leaving, goodbye. And when Tesla left, Edison, he was not sad to see him leave, quite frankly. So when Tesla left Edison's company, he said, you know what? I want to start my own business. I want to make my own business. That way I can make what I want to make. But unfortunately for Tesla, inventions, they cost money. And unlike Edison, who had the financial support of J.P. Morgan, Tesla didn't at this time. So in order to make ends meet, Tesla worked as a ditch digger for $2 a day, which I should have looked this up beforehand, but I'm curious. How much is $2 a day? Let's see. Okay, so he made $56.45 a day. But anyway, that's a horrible way to live. And just imagine you are this genius with a genius idea that can literally change the lives of millions of people, and you are digging ditches to make ends meet just to feed yourself. During this time when he was really broke and he was digging these ditches, he patented his inventions. And if you're not familiar with what patents are government issued licenses that give the owner of an invention intellectual property rights. This includes preventing people from jacking your shit. So with the financial assistance from some friends, Tesla founded the Tesla Electric Company in 1884, and this was the start of Tesla's rise to success. In 1888, Tesla sold his patents for his alternating current tech to this guy named George Westinghouse. Westinghouse was an entrepreneur, an engineer. He was also a really big player in the electricity game during this time. Tesla sold his patents to Westinghouse for $75,000, which in today's money equals to over $2 million. He also got Westinghouse to purchase 200 shares of stock in his company, and he would also receive $2.50 per watt in royalties. However, in 1891, Tesla would waive the royalty agreement to prevent Westinghouse from going bankrupt once things started to get rough. So once Westinghouse got involved in this, he caught the little antennas of Edison. Edison saw Westinghouse as a threat because alternating current AC was in direct opposition of everything that Edison based his creations, his inventions on, which was DC, direct current. And because of this, Edison's sales were going to Westinghouse because AC was less expensive and considered at the time to be much safer because it required less voltage to power people's homes. Like I've already said, Edison was a businessman and he was not about to lose money. So he decided to take the grimy route to combat Westinghouse and Tesla. He started a campaign to smear both of their reputations. This included Edison conducting public execution. Actually, they really were public executions, but this included Edison conducting public displays of electrocuting live animals using AC. You may have already heard about Edison publicly electrocuting this poor elephant named Topsy. Poor Topsy, because Topsy's demise was not the only horrible thing that happened in that elephant's life. That elephant had a really horrible life even before it was electrocuted. Edison also publicly electrocuted dogs as well to show how horrible AC was in comparison to DC. He also hired this guy named Harold Brown, an electrical engineer who also had beef with AC. Edison paid Brown to conduct these public electrocutions using AC current. Mind you, Brown had no scientific training whatsoever to be using this equipment, especially around a bunch of people or on animals. There's this one account that I read about Brown performing a public electrocution on a dog using AC, and in order to keep the crowd from feeling sorry for this poor dog, he lied to them, stating that the dog was vicious, that it had attacked people, just to try to justify this act. There was no record of this dog actually attacking human beings. It was a lie. And Brown, he would actually go on to kill 3 more dogs. And it got so bad that the ASPCA had to intervene to stop him. What's fucked up about these public electrocutions was that they were very misleading to the public, and on purpose. Like I said, Edison was trying to convince the public that AC was much more dangerous than DC was. The problem was that this argument, it wasn't true. But the people, they did not know this, not yet at least. Edison knew this, but he wanted to make people fear AC so much that it would lead to legislation banning AC, making it illegal. And this would knock out his competition. So to make alternating current appear dangerous during these public electrocutions, he would hit the animal with 1,000 volts of direct current. The animal would then survive. He would then apply 330 volts of AC alternating current, and the poor creature would die. So this was his way of showing the public, look, see how much more dangerous AC is? I literally used 1/3 of the voltage with AC versus DC, and the poor animal died. This is what he was trying to show these people. But what Edison and Brown weren't telling their audience was that milliamps or amps also play a crucial role in electricity. Again, I am by no means an expert in electricity, electrical engineering. Like, this is not my jam, okay? And this is my understanding of volts and amps and electricity and how it all plays into each other. Electricity consists of small particles called electrons, while volts or voltage is a measurement of how excited they are or the amount of energy these electrons have. The higher the voltage, the more excited they are, the more they bounce around, the more they move. Amps is the measurement of the electric current. It's the count for how many electrons are in motion. If you increase the amps of the amount of electrons in motion, whether the voltage is high or low, it can have a deadly effect. So if someone during a demonstration were to tamper with the amps or the electric current, that person could make the electric current go from safe to hella fucking deadly. And that's no matter the voltage. So that's the way I understand how Edison and Brown manipulated the audience to make them think that AC was more dangerous than DC. In response to Edison and Harold's smear campaign, Westinghouse retaliated in a similar fashion. He publicly spoke out against Edison and his electrical system, stating that they were responsible for multiple fires, which was true. Now, this beef between Edison, Tesla, and Westinghouse became known as the War of the Currents. Now, this beef was really big news at the time. It was all over the newspapers. Everybody was talking about it. It was a huge deal. Edison and Brown's attempt to discredit Westinghouse and Tesla did not end at just killing animals. If you can believe it, it got even more sinister than that. The War of the Currents went on with Brown fighting for legislation to limit the voltage on alternating current for public use. If he could limit the voltage to 300, it would make using AC on a large scale impossible, therefore running them out of business. While this was going down, New York passed a law permitting electrocution to be used for capital punishment. Westinghouse and Tesla were terrified when they got word that the New York prison system hired Brown. Of all people, they hired Brown to create this electric chair. They just knew that Brown was going to use this as an opportunity, with Edison's financial support, to further diminish the reputation of AC and also Westinghouse. Because at the end of the day, especially with this new technology, who the hell would want to power their home with the same system used to generate electricity that is used to kill people? Nobody. So Brown and Edison, they were like, we got this in the bag. This is the perfect opportunity we need to just put AC and Westinghouse and Tesla in the ground. So while Brown got to work designing this electric chair with Edison's money, Westinghouse, he started making preparations to fight back. The first person who would be put to death with Edison and Brown's electric chair was a man named William Kemmler. And Kemmler confessed to murdering his wife after discovering she had had an affair. Kemmler's lawyers tried to appeal his sentencing to the electric chair on the grounds that electrocution was cruel and unusual punishment. His lawyers made the argument that the electric chair would not be a quick and painless death. But Brown, he was arguing that this would be a very swift, painless, and easy death. So Westinghouse, he sees this opportunity and he decided to get involved by hiring this orator whose name was William Burke Cochran. And this orator would lead the defense in an attempt to prevent AC from being associated with death forever. This criminal case was not only about how this murderer would be put to death, but it also put the War of the Currents on trial. And during this trial, Cochran exposed a lot of shit to the public. They were splashing the tea all over the place in that courtroom. So during the trial, Cochran exposed the fact that Brown shouldn't have even been playing with electricity to begin with. He was in no way, shape, or form certified, experienced, had the educational background to be doing any of this shit, especially designing a death chair. Furthermore, Brown's claims about how electricity affects the human body were invalid because he had no medical training, and therefore he had no idea how electricity affects the human body. He could not guarantee that this man wouldn't feel a thing or that his death would be swift. And yet, despite Brown being grossly unqualified, the state of New York hired him to design this electric chair. But it's crazy because Cochran destroyed this man in court. I mean, he destroyed him. He showed pictures of Brown's designs next to the designs of medieval torture chambers to really demonstrate to them how similar they were, how this man literally designed this chair based on medieval torture devices. Cochran also destroyed Brown's claims that he joined the War of the Currents because of his concerns of public safety. He was concerned about the children, you know what I mean? All those hanging, dangling wires out in the streets that those kids were playing on. Nope, that's not what he was worried about. He was worried about the AC current affecting the children. That was his concern. Cochran exposed Brown for what he truly was, which was a man with close ties to Edison. Edison had everything to gain from this, and it became very apparent when Cochran drew those connecting lines between these two men. In summary, Cochran's point was that Brown was not designing this chair to make death as painless and as quick as possible for murderers or convicted felons. No, he was designing this chair so that he could forever diminish AC and make DC the reigning supreme way of delivering electricity so that Edison and his company remained the only people in this market. Brown and Edison could care less about whoever ended up sitting in that chair. To make this situation even more clear to the public, an electrical engineer named Arthur Kennelly took the stand, and he admitted that no one at that time even knew what effect electricity had on the human body. So everything Brown was saying was nothing but cap. He was making the shit up. And when the prison warden took the stand, he admitted that they had no intention of even testing the damn thing before the guy even sits in the chair. He was going to be the guinea pig. I mean, they could have at least strapped a potato to it and see what happened to a potato. Goddamn. This man's life is worth less than a potato. I mean, granted, he murdered his wife, piece of shit, but you're creating this under the guise that this is going to be favorable to hanging execution. So even with all this information, right, exposing how corrupt Brown and Edison were and this how fucked up this chair was, the judge actually ruled in Brown's favor, in the chair's favor. The judge ruled that there was no evidence showing that this chair was more painful and gave a slower death than being hung. So they lost. But boy, oh boy, was that judge wrong. On March 31st in 1890, the court confirmed Kemmler's death sentence. And those who witnessed this man's death, they would never forget it for the rest of their lives. Kemmler was strapped into the chair with 11 leather straps. 25 witnesses waited as Kemmler was prepped for his death. After the warden flipped the switch, Kemmler's body went into this extremely rigid posture as the electricity surged through his body. And before I keep sharing this information, I just want to say, like, this is pretty disturbing. After 17 seconds of this man's body becoming rigid and his muscles reacting to the electricity, they turned off the current. Then a doctor came over and pronounced him dead. But then, a minute afterwards, they realized his heart was still beating. He then started foaming at the mouth. And one of the reporters that was there that witnessed this actually fainted. It was so disturbing. Then when Kemmler started to breathe again, the warden went back and flipped the switch another time. And if you can believe it, it got even worse from there. Blood vessels started to rupture under his skin, and his hair and skin began to burn. People could literally see the blood vessels just bursting, like the smell. When Tesla and Westinghouse caught wind of this botched execution, they were mortified. And in an attempt to wash his hands clean of this whole fucked up situation, Edison blamed everybody under the sun but himself and Brown. He blamed the doctors that were on site at the execution. He said they should have placed the currents somewhere other than the top of his head because hair hindered conductivity. He also said that if they had put Kemmler's hand in a jar of water, it would have helped conduct the electricity. Now, I don't know if any of that stuff makes a difference. Again, I'm not an electrical engineer, but what I will say is this sounds like a bunch of blame game shit to me. Even though AC was being associated with this botched execution, and this of course wasn't a good look for Westinghouse or Tesla, the pair were given a great opportunity that would finally put to rest the AC and DC debate. In 1893, they won a contract to provide electricity for the World's Columbian Exhibition in Chicago. This was the World's Fair to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the colonizer Columbus's arrival. They were able to light up this entire huge event, and in the end, it showed the public that AC was not something to fear. After this fair, AC was embraced by people and companies all over the US as well as abroad. What's funny is that Tesla was not the only person that Edison had beef with as far as inventors go. One of them was an English inventor and chemist named Sir Joseph Wilson Swan. So anyway, Swan was experimenting with ways to harness the power of electric lighting for domestic purposes, like replacing lanterns and candles with light bulbs. He achieved just that in 1878 when he produced the incandescent light bulb. However, he could only get it to stay lit for about 13 hours, which just was not convenient. It was not realistic. Swan shared his incandescent electric lamp with the world in 1878. He then patented in November in 1880. And in total, it took Swan 20 years to fully realize this invention. On the other side of the pond, Edison was also working on the incandescent light bulb. However, he used Swan's design. He then improved upon that design so that the bulb could last much longer than 13 hours, making it much more practical for everyday use. Even though this was a huge accomplishment, which I will not take away from Edison, at the end of the day, he needed Swan's idea for it to even become a thing. But the thing is, that's fine, but the problem was that he wanted to lay claim to it as a whole. Like, I am the sole inventor of this thing. I mean, think about it. He's known as the person who created the light bulb, but he wasn't. So when Swan got word of this, he sued the shit out of Edison. And then in response to Swan, Edison sued him back. This fight went on for 2 years. When Swan won, part of the settlement from court was that both of their companies would merge to create the Edison and Swan United Electric Light Company. And together, Swan and Edison, they sold incandescent light bulbs. I just find it so interesting that Edison is more known for creating the light bulb than he is the phonograph. It makes no sense. And Tesla didn't really get his flowers until after he died. And what's even sadder is Tesla died alone in his hotel room at 86 with not a penny to his name and with absolutely no claim to fame for all of his hard work. The other thing I want to point out is that Tesla was not a businessman like Edison. He was an inventor through and through. And that was kind of Tesla's downfall. And that also brings me to something else that I was thinking about. I came across this short clip on YouTube of Elon Musk being interviewed, and he's talking about some of his heroes, inventors that he looked up to, and I thought he was going to say Tesla for obvious reasons, but he mentioned Edison. The reason why he said he appreciated Edison more than Tesla was because Edison, his goal was to make electricity accessible everywhere to everybody. But here's my issue with this statement. Tesla did too. That was the whole point of AC, was that it was more cost efficient, that it could give power to larger areas at once. That was the whole point of AC. That makes no sense to me. And so Elon said that was why he is more well known. That is why Tesla kind of faded into obscurity. And I'm like, no, the fuck it wasn't, sir. The reason why Edison is remembered is because he had the financial backing of JP fucking Morgan, dude. Tesla even had to forfeit his royalties to ensure that the company that supported him actually stayed afloat, to prevent it from going bankrupt. That was a huge sacrifice. That man could have walked away with millions, but he didn't, because he wanted to ensure the existence of AC. Edison didn't have to deal with those type of struggles. He was a businessman. The byproduct was that in order to make all that money, a bunch of people would have to have access to it. Obviously, money does not give you insight. So that's the end of my rant and the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and that's it. Bye.
Perfect.